In 1998, the Good Friday Agreement was signed, brokering a peace deal between Republicans and Unionists in Northern Ireland. Nearly a decade later, Al Jazeera visited Belfast to explore ongoing divisions in the city. The film you're about to see was first broadcast in 2007.
There's not been a lot to laugh about in Northern Ireland over the last 40 years. The old mantra, "for God and Ulster," has a new twist these days. The fact that it's now possible to make a joke about it is a sign of the changing times in Northern Ireland. And yet, in many respects, Belfast, the capital of Northern Ireland, remains a divided city. The physical evidence is there for all to see. The modern history of Northern Ireland has been dominated by one thing: the Troubles. A violent, bitter conflict, both political and religious, between those claiming to represent the predominantly Catholic nationalists and those claiming to represent the mainly Protestant Unionists. Broadly speaking, the nationalists, also called Republicans, want Northern Ireland to be unified with the Republic of Ireland, while the Unionists wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom, along with England, Wales and Scotland.
I think this conflict was principally about hatred. Hatred of a people, hatred of my community. And I think it has taken Republicans to realise that with hatred you can achieve nothing.
It was about people's civil rights and human rights. People went out and marched on the streets and were beaten off the streets, and then the British Army came in. The Catholics and nationalists here actually had no basic human rights. They had no voting rights. They had all those rights taken away from them.
But in 1998, Northern Ireland's political parties signed up to the Good Friday Agreement, breaking 3 decades of deadlock. It established a power-sharing assembly and paved the way for the withdrawal of British troops and the disbanding of paramilitary groups. After many false starts, the Assembly assumed its full power in May 2007, and the sworn enemies of yesterday, Unionist leader Ian Paisley and the Republican leader Martin McGuinness, became First Minister and Deputy First Minister. But what Northern Ireland has now is not so much peace as an absence of conflict. Far from disappearing, the walls have grown. Instead of reconciliation, there is partition, an ill-tempered stalemate of separate identities and separated lives.
There's huge amounts of segregation in daily lives, particularly within working-class communities. Kids go to school in different schoolings, Catholic schooling or Protestant schooling. They would just not mix. That's not a consequence of the wars. In the wars, the segregation and the divisions were there before the wars happened. The wars kind of fed into that, and then the further segregation has continued from that. So we're now in a situation where there's more segregation after 13 years of the peace process than there was during the conflict.
Segregation is a fact of life. It's a fact of life whenever we've had 35 years of trouble and mayhem. And people aren't going to get over that very, very quickly or very easily.
The first of the so-called peace lines began as a length of barbed wire, rolled out by the British Army to separate the warring communities in 1969. From then on, they became more common and more complex. Today, there are believed to be 41 deliberate barriers across Belfast.
We estimate that about half of all the barriers have either been built anew or have been extended or enlarged or heightened in some way over the last 10 years, over the course of the peace process.
most notorious barrier was the one between the warring communities of Protestant Shankill and Catholic Falls Road. But the flashpoint of recent years has been the wall that separates the Short Strand, an isolated Catholic enclave in East Belfast, from the surrounding Protestant areas. In 2002, it was the scene of the worst riots in the city since the start of the peace process. Sean McVeigh, a Catholic, lives with his family in the shadow of the Short Strand's wall and has vivid memories of what happened.
There was widespread rioting and attacks on this small area of Short Strand, East Belfast, and most of it was concentrated just at this particular spot because this was seen as a vulnerable spot. The wall was low at the time. The houses here where we live, the whole roofs, every window, upstairs, downstairs, were smashed, destroyed.
There was loads of fireworks and petrol bombs and all, and stones and bottles getting thrown over the wall, and windows and all were broken, cars and all were damaged, and people were hurt, and then our windows and all were covered up, so it was really dark around here, and it wasn't the same as what it used to be, but it was.
Greta Abbott lives with her family on Clúan Place, the other side of the wall, on the Protestant side.
I actually moved in during the Troubles in 2002 because a lot of the people in here had children and were elderly, and they were put out by the people next door, and we needed people to move in here that weren't afraid to live in here, so I up sticks and I moved in.
To my daughter, she was hit in the head with a brick, and that was just in the alley over there. She's just sitting there minding her own business, talking away to her wee chums.
Jesus Christ! The wall here between the two communities has become the focal point of this conflict. This is not a spat between neighbours, but the battle line of a war between two traditions, two denominations, where an us and them mentality still exists.
They nearly killed us. What can we do? The police don't stand up for us, and we did send for people. They come in, they attacked them back, they went home, and that's it, finished. They have to be shown that we're not by ourselves, that other people are there ready to come in and protect us.
They have a sense of insecurity. They've had it for 400 years here. They still feel that they need the wall to keep their foothold in Ireland.
They have got away with getting their own way for the last 10 years from the ceasefire. And the government has give to them all the time. All the time. They want to squash our culture. Our politicians have no choice but to go in the government with murderers, jailbirds, all sorts.
The bitterness felt by the Protestant majority in Northern Ireland has been compounded by the feeling that their own politicians have let them down.
They've tended to be tribal leaders rather than statesmen above their own communities, and they defended their own communities' interests as opposed to looking at the broader needs of the wider communities.
The difficulty again is within staunchly loyalist areas or staunchly Republican areas, whereby they feel a sense of betrayal because their politicians said that they would never share power with Republicans, for example, and all of a sudden, in a very short period of time, a deal was done and they were sitting side by side, laughing and smiling. To me, that's normal politics, but to a lot of our communities here, that is a step backwards.
Even today, politicians in the new Northern Ireland Assembly still occasionally seem locked into their old mindsets.
We've got Republican ministers administering British law, swearing an oath of allegiance to British Crown forces. So ideologically, I think Republicans know that they actually lost that war, and what they have to do is now come to terms with that.
Jennifer McCann is a member for the Northern Ireland Assembly in West Belfast. She represents the main Republican party, Sinn Féin. Under a mural of Bobby Sands, the first Republican to die on hunger strike in prison, she points up the gulf that still exists between her and her Protestant colleagues.
I don't think Republicans were ever defeated, and certainly I think that any Republican that I know that is in this process and everything else, that they are taking this here to the end goal. I mean, I've been part of the Republican movement from I've been 14 years of age. I'm now 47 years of age. I'm still a Republican. I've still got my long-term goal as a socialist United Ireland.
But this is not a version of future events that the Protestants subscribe to.
They think that they're going to get this as part of United Ireland, and there'll be another war before that ever happens.
It is this absence of trust dating back centuries that has kept the walls of Belfast in place.
It's not the first time that walls have been built in Ireland, you know. They've been there for 400 years, you know. And walls aren't just built of bricks and mortar. They can be built with legislation and laws and, you know, prejudice, you know. So I think we'll have to break down the walls of prejudice, you know, first, before you can take down the physical walls, you know.
Northern Irish Protestants parade through the streets of Belfast. But this is no carnival. Depending on which side you're on, the marching season is either a celebration or a provocation. For the marchers, the victory of the Protestant King William over the Irish Catholics in 1690 is at the very core of their conviction that they are, and will always remain, part of the United Kingdom.
Well, parading is very much a way of life, a cultural expression of a person's identity, especially from the Protestant community. It's a celebration of a battle which took place over 300 years ago at the Boyne. And it's a celebration, an expression of freedom, an expression of liberty, an expression of fraternity. And something which is not only related to American Independence Day, to the celebrations at the Bastille in France, to the celebrations which we have and see in many other countries where people celebrate their liberty.
For staunch loyalist people, they're a symbol of a victory in a battle against the Catholic Church, basically. It's part of their cultural identity. For the wider unionist community, I think it is a symbol of their identity, although not as strong as some loyalists may deem it to be.
But from a Catholic perspective, the drums and banners are triumphalist gestures, calculated to keep old wounds open.
You have to understand, we're only coming out of a conflict situation. There are people who are living in those areas that have been murdered by loyalist paramilitaries, and I think that it's insulting for them to have to watch an orange parade walk down that is holding banners of loyalist paramilitaries, for instance. You know, it's very hard for residents to take that.
On both sides, the past is ever present, whether it's the Battle of the Boyne more than 3 centuries ago, or a riot within the last decade. For those on the front line, time has not been a healer here. The conflict has merely found other means of expression. Officially, the conflict in Northern Ireland is over. But more than a decade into the peace process, many of the sectarian rituals live on as a means of distinguishing, reinforcing, and boasting. And on the 12th night of every July, towering bonfires are lit by Protestants to mark their famous victories over the Catholics in 1690. The crowds cheer when the hate symbols, chiefly Irish flags, go up in flames.
It was always a traditional thing with loyalists, right back till when I was in the 60s when I was young. They're putting up a flag to mark their territory. And when you're in here, you're in loyalist territory, you know, so there's been always that there. When I was young in the 60s, it was illegal to fly a tricolour. You could be jailed.
If you come back here in a couple of weeks' time, you will see visible signs from the Church Strand with national foreign flags. Any flags in my street are British flags, Northern Ireland flags, Scottish flags, not from a foreign country. Theirs is a foreign country. They fly the tricolour, but they accept the British money.
But the symbolism doesn't always take the form of flag waving. Some of the writing on the walls that have divided Northern Ireland have been raised beyond crude propaganda to an art form, with its roots in another country, another conflict.
I was asked this about 5 years ago by the locals, and was basically well into the peace process, and I think what they were trying to say was to let future generations know about the individuality of the characters in this mural. Because I remember watching funerals of Palestinian young people killed in the West Bank, and at their funerals they would carry pictures of these people, and I thought I would like to know who that person is, what they represented, why did they die, why did such a young life be taken. And I think it's also transmitted into these type of murals. When people look at these faces, young people, young men, young women, they ask the question, why, what was it about?
Danny Devaney, a Republican who honed his talent while serving time in the Maze prison, is now involved in the unlikeliest of artistic collaborations. He's paired up with the son of one of Northern Ireland's best-known Protestant loyalist leaders. The two men who in the past chronicled the Troubles, each on his own side of the walls, have come together to bring a new message to the city. In a Northern Ireland where separation has generally become more entrenched since the end of hostilities, it's a remarkable act of collaboration and hope.
It's absolutely a sign of the time that we're living in, because this wouldn't have been possible 10 or 15 years ago. It just wouldn't have been. And I would have never considered the notion 10 or 15 years ago. It's only been allowed possible to be made possible through the work that other people have done on the ground. It's just carried on through myself and Danny, which is an engagement that needs to happen at every level of society.
In my community, the walls were used. It was all to do with censorship, and what was to do with dealing with issues that no one else would focus on. And basically what the images you've seen on our walls reflected the feeling within our communities. That's all we were doing. We were vehicles for fear or anger or frustration that was taking place within our communities.
Unfortunately, within my community, the murals were used to highlight different things. They were used to mark territory by groups and organisations through fear generated by the political leadership of the time. I believe that my community missed an opportunity where murals are concerned.
Now the two men are determined to use the murals as a force for unity rather than division. Mark and Danny's hope is that their own writings on the wall may dismantle those other walls, the virtual ones that have been erected over the decades.
I mean, we met accidentally, but there's so many barriers in front of people holding people back. And if those can be broken down, then my kids, my grandkids can meet up with people from Mark's community and they'll find the same. I think that's a key. And it's once those barriers, once those walls start to fall.
Trying to change people's mindsets, because that's where the barriers exist in the mind, you know.
But for both men, optimism and realism are finely balanced.
We don't know, but hopefully, even if a small part of that we can add something to it. Yeah, it's.
We would hope that we might. We're not.
It's worthwhile trying.
But it's definitely worth a go.
But whatever progress may be made at this individual level, some parts in the communities are still bent on division.
At the moment, there's a decision waiting to be implemented to build a fence just a couple of miles from where we are now, around a school and between two communities. We need to get to a situation where there's no more barriers being built. And not only that, that the idea of building a barrier is considered to be unacceptable.
The lesson of Northern Ireland is that dismantling a wall is far harder than erecting it. Walls are indicative not just of division, but of mistrust. In Belfast, the day the walls come down is still a long way off.
They wanted this street, and they didn't get it, but they wrecked it in the process. Now, I'm not going to justify anything else. I love my country, I love my culture, and that wall is staying where it is. Amen.
The way I would do their heads, as I told you I was doing before, is measure what space you have left.
Nearly a decade after this film first aired, we returned to Belfast to catch up with Danny Devaney. He's still painting the city's walls.
So what are you going to focus on now?
Silhouettes right across that space.
No.
No?
I told you it's be where they are. You can maybe have another couple. It's your line towards the silhouettes is the problem. See that projection line? That's what's wrong.
The political work of Danny and his muralist brethren had become world famous, but some of their canvases are disappearing. In 2016, the first wall began to come down here, in the Catholic Republican area of Ardoyne. Ministers have vowed that all the walls would be demolished by 2023. The demolition of the Ardoyne wall is a symbolic milestone, but not all of its structure has actually come down yet. Danny meets local residents to find out why.
If the residents don't feel safe, we need to be at a certain space where they themselves need secure, because they're the ones who live.
Well, if you walk further down the road, you'll see another part of the wall that was put up. It's under the back of people's homes, so it is. Exact same wall, only it was strengthened a bit more. People at the minute just don't feel safe for that there to come down.
I just got to the stage where at one particular time someone came in and said, 80% of people want the walls down, but then there's that wee caveat when the time was right.
Ardoyne is an area historically notorious for violence. Fear that these conflicts may continue to flare up today leads many to seek protection behind the walls. But some residents believe that barriers are not the solution for today's troubles.
The walls weren't fit for purpose, they were for drive-by shootings and things that could happen at those times, and a lot of people would have told us the walls only attracted trouble as well. You could stand behind them and you weren't going to get chased really, and so it attracted as much trouble as it prevented. That's one of the things that we had got. And why do you want walls? Said protection, and then the other side were turning and saying they didn't really give you protection.
Although sectarianism still exists, the government is now attempting to give the city a new image, encouraging artists like Danny to find new subjects for their murals.
I then very quickly understood what they were saying. It's not so much re-imaging, they wanted to re-politicise us.
And he's still collaborating with Protestant muralist Mark Irvine.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks. What's the crack?
Doing all right. Yourself? Good. Rather than calling it re-imaging, they should have called it reinvention, because really that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to reinvent those communities like nothing ever really happened here. And as Danny says, sort of sweep it under the carpet. I don't enjoy looking at that imagery, but I understand fully why it's there.
As well as remembering the struggles of the past, Danny believes murals should reflect the community's aspirations for a peaceful future.
If the murals are changing, it's because the mindset of the people in whose communities we paint is changing.
Today, they're painting for Northern Ireland's next generation.
I think it's our foremost duty to be part of the solution. We're using talents, for little as what they are, to try and say to our kids, if struggle and politics and sovereignty can be resolved through dialogue, then why choose another route?